Welcome, Sandy and Nick. It's a pleasure to have you here today. I want to start with some icebreakers. So, Nick, in the words of Taylor Swift, you've had your own fair share of eras, from customer success pioneer all the way now to the architect of the customer OS. And now, this new phase with Skilljar. So, tell us, what era are we entering into now for customer education?
Chris, how can you start with a better question? I love it. So I think Sandy will be able to answer this much more because I'm so grateful, like the domain expertise she and her team have. But as we'll talk a lot about, we've been passionate about customer education, both internally and for clients for a long time. So I will say customer education is no longer in its debut, which is Taylor's first album. And the customer education professionals have learned to speak now and they are fearless. And we know it's going to continue evermore. So if you didn't get it, those are all Taylor eras. But in all seriousness, I think what's pretty cool is how, and we'll talk a lot more about this, how the market is evolving and companies are evolving from seeing these as different functional silos, CSM, onboarding, professional services, training, community, and seeing it more and more as one cohesive journey. And that's why we talk about what we call Gainsight Customer OS, Customer Operating System, because we really think that organizations need to integrate their strategy around the journey of a customer and, of course, integrate their technology as well.
Now, Nick, I do have to add, if we are actually going to parallel the Taylor Swift eras, I would probably put us now in the Midnight's era, and let me tell you why. Because when Skilljar first started, it was more like the fearless days, just getting their footing. Customer education was a new thing. In fact, we didn't even call it customer education then. And then we went through the heyday of SaaS, I would call that the reputation, kind of those early mid albums. And then COVID happened and the, SaaSacer happened and we got really reflective. So that was maybe the Evermore folklore era, which is my personal kind of my favorite albums. And so now I think we're in the kind of balanced true self. What is customer education really about going forward at its core, which is really the Midnights and then Tortured Poets era. So
Sandy, did we just become best friends? Because that's what it feels like to me. I have like so many follow-up questions because both all-time favorite album and all music. But Chris probably wants to talk about customer education, I guess. So we'll let him do that, and we'll talk later.
Well, hopefully you record that conversation because that's going to be pure. That's going to be pure gold. Wonderful. Well, Sandy, I love how you mentioned the evolution also of customer education, but something I've always really wanted to ask you. You've talked about this idea of your trained customers are your best customers. Skilljar has talked about that, right? It's part of your branding. And I've always wanted to know if you could take us back to that moment when this kind of idea, hypothesis, belief that you had actually turned into like a business truth. Was it a moment in time? Was it a group of customers at a phase of Skilljar's growth where all of a sudden you were like, yes, like it's not only that we know this inherently, but we can prove the fact that our trained customers are truly our best customers.
yeah, well, Chris is interesting because I don't come from either a SaaS or a learning background. And so when I started this company, we pivoted a few times early on. And then finally, when we became an enterprise grade customer education solution, it was almost astonishing to me that the customer success movement was a thing. I was like, you've got to be kidding me that there's a movement to educate companies that their customers matter so that they'll pay more. And, I came from Amazon, which is a very customer centric culture, but it was just a little bit like, well, duh, like, and so to me, it's always been a truth that trained customers are your best customers because can anyone really argue that untrained customers are good customers? Like, I don't think so. And so, but look, I'm super data oriented. And I do think sometimes in business, we just need to take a step back and look at the big picture. We don't need to prove everything. I'll answer your question though. But it's also why I've never been a fan of this correlation versus causation debate, which was really big in customer education, I don't know, 5 years ago. And I was always going to say, like, sure, go get the data, but you're having the wrong conversation because there's nothing in a company that's proven with like to a correlation versus causation type of analysis, whether that's employee turnover or marketing attribution, or at some point you just have to use logic and say, call a spade a spade. So that being said, there is an incredible amount of data that's not been gathered, and I have yet to see any analysis that's shown anything except that training has a enormously positive impact. And to give credit where it's due, I think the first real study that was done was maybe 2018, 2019-ish. And it's back when a gentleman named Daniel Quick, if you know him, was still at Asana leading their education program. And at the time, one of their use cases was improving conversion from free to paid licenses. And they were actually able to do a true A/B test, and they had the volume to be able to make that statistically significant. And they did find, not surprisingly, very large, substantial uplift when training was both offered and consumed. And so since then, I think there's been, dozens, if not hundreds of companies that have done some sort of analysis that connects training with higher product usage, higher retention, higher expansion, better NPS, fewer support tickets.
Uh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's such an important point to make around the causation versus correlation. And I purposely wasn't going to bring that up, but I'm glad that you did, that you did bring it up, because it is, something that I would say even still today, right? Even though it wasn't maybe a bigger debate 5 years ago, as we're working with businesses who are just starting off on their customer education or kind of academy journey, inevitably that comes up 3, 6, 9, even 12 months down the road of like, we have this now, we're getting great feedback, we're seeing possibly some product adoption correlation, but what does this actually mean? Should we double down? Should we invest more? So kind of thank you for sharing that background. And Nick, I have a similar question for you, maybe a little bit different of a perspective, but I'm curious to know from your perspective, when was the first time you maybe saw customer education, and maybe the answer is from the beginning, but when's that first time you saw it as more of like, more than a support function, more than something CSMs have to do one-on-one on their monthly calls or bi-weekly calls? What was that moment, or maybe it was a phase in Gainsight's growth when it clicked to you of like, oh wait, this is going to be part of this customer OS that I'm envisioning?
Chris, I love the question because, yeah, the industry has evolved so much in customer success. And like alluding to what Sandy was talking about, I remember trying to explain to my kids what customer success is. And, if you said, oh, we want to make sure our customers are successful, it's like, sounds so obvious why people should be doing it today, right? That's just so obvious. But what's interesting about customer education is I saw it as a huge way to scale. And I saw this firsthand because in our own company, we had CSMs that were basically training people and doing a great job at that, but one-on-one. This is, they would get on WebExes. I know WebEx isn't as common now, so it kind of dates the story, but this is like 2013. They're training our customers on using our own software, and they're on a WebEx one-on-one and talking about it. And that's how it was. So that was the first thing, was like just noticing the manual effort for our customers in educating their team. Now, I didn't know that there was a way to solve that. Like, I didn't know Sandy. But chapter 2 was pretty simple, which was we started using Skilljar. And I don't know how long, as Sandy could probably see somewhere, but we have a head of education. Her name's Lila, and even her predecessors, they chose Skilljar independently. We had no relationship at the point. And then, one things we did was we built our academy and a certification program. And like a lot of Skilljar clients or education professionals, we saw a huge difference in metrics with or without certification. So the stat we had at the time, which I think still holds, is that our NPS, Net Promoter Score, for clients that were not certified was 36. Our NPS for clients that were certified was 72. Now, again, Sandy, rightly, you could say correlation, causation, but nonetheless, like, that's pretty interesting. And then the final moment in the story so far was speaking at the Connect conference from Skilljar in 2022. Sandy was kind enough to invite me. I went in, and just seeing the passion from this community, a few hundred people in a ballroom in San Diego, and it was awesome. We have our own conference at Gainsight, which is great. And seeing these two together was huge. So those are my moments.
Sandy, you've used a powerful metaphor in the past around this idea that we often teach customers like frozen blobs from the moment of sale, when in fact they're this living, breathing organism that's evolving constantly. So I'm curious to know, what's, from your opinion, or perspective, what's the risk of thinking of customers in this frozen blob way? And how have you seen education help companies stay aligned to this reality of the evolving customer?
I've experienced this firsthand because with Skilljar, we've had customers now that are hitting their 10-year anniversary mark, which is absolutely unbelievable. Thank you, Skilljar customers. And over that time, I've literally seen some start with 500 people, go public, get taken private. They've got reorged every couple years. They've gone all paid training. Oh, now they're going to do all free training, and now it's going to be back to paid training. We've seen CEOs and executives and the training team turn over multiple times. For some of these customers, I feel like we have more continuity on their training program than the company actually does. And so all that to say is over time, any given customer might have dozens, if not hundreds, of product users that are constantly onboarding and offboarding. Their business objectives, especially for SaaS companies, are completely changing. Maybe it was growth and onboarding, and now it's profitability, adoption, and usage. And you've constantly got learners with different roles, changing roles, and different levels of proficiency. So the risk, it's not just a risk, it's inevitable that you are going to get misaligned over time with what your customers are trying to achieve. And I also think all of us that work at software companies, we just have a blind spot where we tend to assume a much higher level of proficiency than actually exists in reality. I feel this very firsthand while onboarding into Gainsight recently. I'm like, wow, I know nothing about how to use any of these new tools. And so that's very much a first-time experience, like somebody that's using your software for the first time. And what's terrific about customer education, especially a more mature, robust one, is that companies can continuously serve the needs of a dynamic and changing learner population. As difficult as this problem is, it is actually completely solvable if you really understand your personas. And you can do this with pretty automated tools and little manual intervention. So sometimes I think of it like passive income. So education is absolutely essential because it's essentially passive onboarding, passive training that's available all the time, working for you, working for your customers, and even as your customers change.
I love that. Education, the passive income of the customer operating system. We have this group cohort, part of the SaaS industry, and really even beyond SaaS. Skilljar supports, more than just SaaS businesses who kind of understand this idea or who are investing in customer education. But then we have those folks who aren't ready, right? We hear things a lot from SaaS leaders like, we don't need an academy yet. It's not a strategic priority today. Our competitors don't have one yet, so we don't want to start the arms race, or maybe things, along the lines of, our software is so intuitive, or it will be so intuitive in a year, that there's no reason to invest in customer education. So I'm curious to know from both of you, like, what's your message to these types of businesses? Do they have a point?
I mean, all I can think of is the Greek tragedy of hubris, right? And pride comes before a fall. If your competitors aren't doing it yet, to me, that's your time to get an edge. But look, in all honesty, it does depend on the maturity of a company, like how big they are. If you're a 5-person startup, you probably have things you need to do that are higher up than an academy. But I'm hard pressed to think of any successful SaaS brand that doesn't have a training and education program. So it's a question of if, not when. And look, Skilljar has some customers that might be considered very basic. In fact, one of them, public company, is essentially a phone service. And I remember when they first became a customer, one of our board members even made a joke like, do people actually need training to make a phone call? And the answer is actually, yes, they do, because the admin needs training to set it all up, configure all the governance rules. The partners need training to sell and implement. The developers need training to integrate with their service. So yeah, pretty much anybody that's building a product, even one that makes phone calls, you need to have an academy if you're actually trying to serve all your personas and all the jobs that they're trying to do. And the other thing I'd say is what Nick said about Gainsight early on is, you're already doing a lot of training. You may not just realize that. And it is very common, especially for growing SaaS companies, to see that their CSMs are spending a quarter, even half of their time on training activities, not to mention what's happening with support reps. So there can be a lot of shadow training going on. And just to get it into a box and have it be high quality and scalable is actually a better approach than having all this shadow training.
Yeah, I can chime in as well because I totally agree with everything Sandi said, and I think like a couple thoughts. One is just I think the principle of customer experience and customer success in the broad sense, not the role but the strategy, is basically that like products are becoming less differentiated over time, and the barriers to entry and exit are dropping. And so therefore, like you have to re-earn your customers' business every day. Like that's the reality, right? It's like businesses are becoming more like restaurants. Think about restaurant, so much
Mm.
of the restaurant's the experience, right? It's not like you have to go back to that restaurant every time. You haven't
Yeah.
subscribed to anything. It's you had a great meal and you go back the next time. And this is becoming even a bigger deal with AI, where the cost of building software is plummeting. Some people have heard the term vibe coding, where any of you
Mhm.
could go into like some of these tools like Lovable and type in build me an app to do X, Y, and Z. You could build a pretty decent first V1 app. And so what that means is you really have to work hard to re-earn your customers' business. And the question is, how do you have that durable way to retain your customers? And one way to do it, and I'll say like this is funny for me to say, but like one way is you throw a bunch of people at it, CSMs and whatnot, and that's good. You need some of that, right? But in some ways, that's like just if using a different analogy, the dam is about to burst, and there's like a little crack in the dam, and you're putting your finger into the dam to prevent it, and it's like not sustainable, right? And actually, we talk a lot about being proactive, but the truth is, if what you're doing is waiting for a customer's executive to change and try to save the day with a new person, or noticing they stop using the product and then calling them to get them to use it, or like noticing that like they have no idea how to do X, Y, and Z, and then you're like getting on a Zoom to train them, that's not proactive. That's reactive, right? If training is what did you call it? Like, what was the analogy you used, Sandy, about the financial? Was it investment or
Passive
uh,
income.
passive income? Then I think like the reactive form of customer success is like buying crypto. It's just like not very predictable, right? And so what I love about, I don't want to call it training, but it's
Mm.
really enabling your customers for success, is that that's very different than just like check the box, did you take training? You're building an army of advocates. You're building the person in your company that when the executive at your customer says, we need to do X, Y, and Z, that person knows how to do it. And if that person doesn't know how to do it, then that executive is going to be like, why do we need this software? And every one of Skilljar's customers is enabling their customers to get the best out of their products and services and making them more sticky. And the last comment I'll make, I was just talking to a CEO of a customer, about a $500 million revenue, so a decent sized business. And we were talking about the fact that it's not about training, it's not about community, it's all these little silos. It's about creating a professional identity for your customers where they feel like they can get the most value, but it's also helping their careers. And I hope everyone on this call realizes you're not just, enabling software retention, you're literally helping people's careers. And I love the mission Skilljar had, like the impact you've had on people's careers is amazing.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say too is like training has existed far before the cloud and SaaS.
Mm-hmm.
The old school way, the on-prem way is you would go install software in someone's server closet and you actually couldn't even recognize revenue or be deployed until the customer had been trained. And for the most part, because Skillshare has a lot of non-software companies too, like that's how it's done. And trainers go into hospitals, they go to manufacturing floors, and software is not a thing where like, oh, now it's so easy to use, anybody can just use it, and all of a sudden we don't need training anymore. Like that has existed long in this industry before, cloud or SaaS or any of it. And in fact, as software went to the cloud, now you've got the complexity of now your software's changing all the time. Now people don't work for the same company for 40 years as well. And so if anything, the need for training has increased dramatically because both your product is changing and the people are changing much more than they used to.
Yeah, I love this, and this concept of like transformative impact, I think is such a key piece to it, right? It's not just training, right? It's not just education. It's not just helping somebody use a software, but it's truly how does it impact their career? How does it help them get a promotion? How does that help them get a new job? Right. And we saw that at HubSpot all the time. People would send us messages and say, thank you so much for this certification, right? I've gotten here, right? I look at HubSpot now as a brand that's helped me grow in my career. And just seeing that impact and that ripple effect, right? Even we used to hear things like, not necessarily HubSpot Academy, but HubSpot has allowed me to send my kids to see their grandparents in Europe for the first time in their lives. And you think about, Nick, to what you said about advocacy, right? What does that create for somebody who feels like it's not just a business providing software, but it's a business who's enabling my success and growth professionally,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
So impactful, and that doesn't go away tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so I think that I just wanted to kind of reiterate that, because when you said that, I'm like, yes, that's why we wake up every day in customer education. That's why we wake up to create educational content for business users or anybody else in the world, is that opportunity to give them the tools, the resources, the education to grow.
Now, I do to argue the other side. There are, I
Yeah.
think, certain industries where formal academies tend to come much sooner or later than others. So, for
Mhm.
example, kind of in the open source developer world, like
Mhm.
I find those types of products, they tend to introduce academies about the time they're going public, actually. And, we've got a bunch of them as customers, fortunately, but prior to that, those types of products tend to use like documentation.
Mhm.
Um, and then you look at some other types of industries, I think project management, HR software,
Mhm.
security, they tend to introduce training very, very early. So I think just kind of depends on a little bit of the learner too. But
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you see from an industry perspective, does it have anything to do with the amount of technical resources that are needed versus maybe strategic, or like, if you're in marketing, best practices are always changing. Google's making updates to algorithm. Like, you have to stay up to date on those things a little bit more. Does the industry's kind of collective knowledge and how fast that change have any indication of maturity for like an academy?
I don't think so. I mean, I think ad tech changes as fast as open source probably. So to me, it's around learning preference. Developers, especially
Mhm.
ones that are adapting the latest technologies, are probably used to like tinkering around. They may have more expertise sometimes than the company that's providing the services themselves. Um, versus I think in some other, like HR, security, project management, I don't think it's coincidence that those industries are, there's credentials, there's professional development hours, and there's more of just a motion of the learner thinking, I'm going to sit down and take training periodically and refresh my skills, versus I think, hardcore developers are just going to be more like tinker types. I'm obviously
Yeah.
generalizing here, but certain industries I think tend to have more kind of formal training DNA than others.
Yeah, that makes sense. We always like to have like a bell curve, and on one side is learn to do, and the other side is do to learn. And definitely when a software or a technology is younger in its development, it seems as though the people that are attracted or are willing to jump into that, the early adopters, are the do to learn. And then
Mhm.
they do something incredible, and the rest of the industry, the rest of us look and say, how'd they do that?
Yeah.
And then that's like, okay, cool. Well, here's the learning to help you do what other people did
Yeah.
and learned from doing. So it's interesting how you paint that picture.
Yeah. And, for go to market and ad tech, because of a strong agency presence, there's also a need for training and certification if you want to
Mm.
start that ecosystem a little bit more than other industries too. So,
I think that's a really good point about profiling the industries. And the one thing I'd add, Chris, like I love this do to learn and learn to do. That's a really cool framework. And some of you watching probably have read the Crossing the Chasm. It's like a very famous business book. And it reminds me a lot of that, because in the Crossing the Chasm says kind of people, early adopters start using technology, eventually becomes mainstream, and the types of people are different in each phase. And I'd imagine the early adopters are the do to learn, and then the mainstream are the learn to do. And the thing that when you were talking brought up for me that might be very timely for people is obviously we have like a seemingly infinite number of AI tools now that are emerging, right? And yesterday I was watching, because I'm obsessed with AI, I was watching like some video from a startup, as some of you probably would know, that's like sales development, like prospecting AI tool.
Mm.
And the person had made a 1 hour YouTube video on best practices on using this. And and it was just a YouTube video, right? Like, but what it got me thinking was, oh, wow, one of the things that's really unique about AI, it's so radically different that we have to learn a lot, because it's like changing the
Mhm.
entire way. It's not just the way we like think about like, I don't know, analyzing a file or something. It's the way our brains think about like work. And so I could imagine for a lot of people watching a complete flourishing of the need for education in these like new AI business models. They may not yet be there. They may be just doing YouTube videos, but I bet very soon they're all going to be investing in what folks on this call do for a profession.
Well, OpenAI just launched its own academy a week or
I
two.
know. Yeah, I
And
saw
it's
that.
not in a learning system, not on Skilljar by Gainsight or anything else, but it does show there is a need for education that comes in parallel with the evolution of AI as it goes from those early adopters to more mainstream product users.
So well said.
Yeah, I love that. So this is kind of where I think transitioning to kind of the evolution of learning, the future of learning. And I think of, you'd mentioned kind of Nick, vibe
Yeah.
coding. We're talking a little bit about kind of what does education look like and what's role does it play with AI. So the first thing that comes to mind is around like just prompt and prompt engineering and thinking about today the user interface when it comes to SaaS businesses is closely tied to the educational content that's produced. But as we get more into this world of being able to say, build me a report that shows the impact on retention for those folks who have X certification, or orchestrate a workflow series based off of X, Y, and Z, it's going to be a lot more prompt focused. And I'm curious to know, as we're thinking about the future, what does that look like for education? What does that mean for how we're going to learn and how we're going to bring education to our customers?
Yeah, I've thought about this a little bit, and prompt engineering is its own discipline now, right? And
Mm.
for those who have tried it, it does take on different aspects depending on the application you're using and the tools you're using. And so in that world, I think education becomes even more critical. Um, the other thing is, if you think about software becoming more, natural language and chat oriented, it's going to be really hard to get context. I mean, you can imagine, I don't know, MSN portal versus Google search in the early days, right? Like you used to be able to
Yeah.
get a whole bunch of context. I want to see the weather. I want to think about sports. And now all of a sudden with you just got a blank search bar. So is there a world in which a software application just becomes a blank search bar? Um, because of how we use software today, it's very much guided by the UX design, like UX and product design. They're actually, in some ways, almost guiding you through the application to what the designer thinks you should be doing. And as AI becomes a way to do that, well, actually, as the human, I need even more context about what I should be doing, so they don't have all those visual clues. So those are just a couple thoughts.
Yeah, I can add in some. Totally agree with what Sandy said, and I really like your last point about the blank search bar, and what do you do when you have a open text bar? And I think there's a couple other opportunities for training in this new world. I think one of them is even like when I look at it, yeah, there's prompt based interfaces, which obviously are going to be huge, kind of chat based interfaces. There's your traditional user interfaces, web, mobile, etc. And
Mm.
then there's also agentic where there's no user interface. Or maybe there's a thing you type in first, but then it just does work for you, right? Obviously, that's in some ways like where we're all headed. And each of those, I think, could create interesting training opportunities. So, like the first one where you have like or first or second, the web UI where you're embedding AI into an existing app. I actually think that's still good. There's going to be a lot of that because there's some situations where a prompt isn't the best way to interact, right? Like there's, we have a mouse and a keyboard because there's different ways we interact. We don't just use a mouse. We don't just use a keyboard. We use both. And so I think there'll be some apps where, web UIs are kind of like the mouse, right? You're clicking around and so on. And it's just more efficient, especially for power users. So you'll see some of that. But AI is going to be embedded into those and you'll want to know how to use it. And so that's to me like one of the things I love about Skilljar's vision of like learning everywhere is
Mhm.
you'll have the AI training built into the app. And so you're about to do something and in the moment, it'll show you how can you use AI to do this better, right?
Yeah.
And that's like everyone is using, whether or not you think you're using AI, you're using AI because it's in every app you use, right? Part one. Part two is what Sandy said, the prompt, the blank box, like what do I do? And just like there's a lot of just how do I guide somebody? And some of that can be done in the application itself, but some of them could require training. The third one I'll add in, maybe as a new thing to think about, is AI is clearly not just re-engineering software, it's re-engineering work and jobs. And so we're going to have to like enable our customers to be trained on new ways of their job, which is
Mhm.
related to our software, but not the exact same thing, right? So you think about it just in, let's pick a random example. So marketing. So I'm a marketing tech company. I make software that do campaigns or whatever, right? My customers' jobs are being completely re-architected. there's probably not a content writing person anymore, because that's a very logical starting point for AI. In fact, there's probably one orchestration person for marketing for a given campaign that's able to blend content writing, graphic design, etc. I need to train them on how to do a new job that they have no idea how to do, right? It's like they started as a content writing person or a graphics person. Now they have to do everything. And so I believe there's a huge opportunity for everyone here to look at your jobs, not just as training people on using your software, but training people on a completely new paradigm of work, which to me is very exciting.
I'll add another. You're going to have to train somebody to feed the model. And
Yeah, that's
because for all of
right.
these AI tools, I love the phrase garbage in, garbage out, right? And so
Hmm.
all of these AI driven tools will only be as good as the data that's fed into them. And so while some jobs may be changing, there's going to be new jobs created of like, how do you actually get the optimum data inputs and structure into whether it's the Gainsight health model or the CRM marketing generator thing. That's going to be new work that the company has to do, and somebody has to do that. And I think they would benefit from training.
One other comment I can say, you
Yeah.
just brought something up for me because, you'll have such a better analogy for this or way to talk about Sandy, so I find funny saying it in front of you. But I think like if you said like education in the most generic sense is, changing the way people's minds work and their jobs work and changing people's lives, and like there's more and more ways you could talk about it. You could argue right now is the biggest discontinuous education moment and need in the history of humanity. Because all of a sudden, we're going from like one way of living and working and everything to a radically different. In a world that's like, I think most people know there's this term non-deterministic, where it's like the way generative AI works is, at least from our perception, it's not the same every time. It's not predictable. We are not used to that at all. And so I think it's actually like if you're in education, whether you're in like educating children or humans or workers, there's never been a bigger time ever.
Yes, it's like the Industrial Revolution. Right now,
Hmm.
we're the current way we're doing things. We're, like all the farmers in the rural agrarian society, and the world is about to completely change, and it's going to be incredibly disruptive. And education is the gap of how do we, turn our current sort of uh, SaaS 1.0 world into the, AI driven world, and it's going to be massive, massive change.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way for us to look at the success of our education, right? It's not just did somebody know something, did someone pass a test, but what were the behavioral changes? And were those
Hmm.
behavioral changes resulting in, outcomes and resulting in success, right? A hat tip to Kirkpatrick model, but really this idea, it's not just someone took a course, right? But it's like, what are those behavioral changes? And Nick, I think that really aligns with what you were saying in terms of like not just teaching product, but thinking about strategy, how to approach a job. And Sandy, this aligns with something else I've been thinking about, which you've shared in terms of businesses that use Skilljar don't just use it for customer education. They take some of that theory, some of that strategy, and they create courses and certifications and open that up to the industry. And so,
Mhm.
Nick, as I'm thinking about this, I'm like, wait a second, does Gainsight now have a top of the funnel tool? And then it got me thinking, and it's like, are we kind of witnessing the beginning of this customer operating system evolving to like a complete go-to-market platform?
Are you in our meetings, Chris? Like, is that what's happening here? Um, yeah, I'm just kidding. I think you're on to something, and I can't say exactly. I don't know exactly where it's
Sure.
all going to go, but yeah, I mean, it seems pretty straightforward that we are evolving the way we sell and market. I think the evolving the nature of what a software company is. There's this well-known venture capitalist named Sarah Tavel, I think you pronounce her name, and she wrote this blog post a while back called "You Sell Work, Not Software." So what I think
Hmm.
she meant by that is, we now are able to, with agentic technology and AI in general, we're able to deliver like a value proposition. For example, you're not selling marketing technology, you're actually selling leads, right? That happens to have technology to drive that. And I think what that practically means is the more companies sell work, not software, the more the process of them selling their value prop is actually just about showing it. So I just have another very real world example. I was speaking to the CEO of a very prominent, large multi-billion dollar SaaS company this morning. And he's telling me about his new AI capabilities. We use the core product. He's like, we'd love to have you go try the AI. The AI costs a certain amount of money. I don't remember how much. We said, we don't have budget for it this year, the classic dance, right? And he says like, okay, just turn it on. You don't have to pay anything through the end of the year. Just use it. And it's funny because I was like, okay, great, let's do it. And now the sales process is going to be the customer success process. It's going to be the training process. It's the same thing. And then interestingly enough, I reflect, I was like, wow, we have a new AI product called Staircase.ai, and we're selling it the same way too. We're just like, turn it on, start using it, right? And every single AI first product is like that. ChatGPT, you can use it for free, right? All of these are the same. And I think that this change in the way we sell is going to change the way we think about the customer experience. To your point, Chris, it becomes top of the funnel.
I love that. Like when I think about the existing go-to-market platforms out there, it's always like we started from the CRM perspective or we started from the marketing perspective. And it seems like with Gainsight, it's like, no, we started from actually what matters, which is this durable growth, which is helping
The
customers be
customer.
successful, retaining them, upselling, cross-selling. And now we're moving our way almost backwards into marketing and
Yes.
into sales with this
Set it up.
perspective that you just shared of how do we actually sell AI tools? And it's getting people using them, feeling comfortable, changing those behaviors. So going back isn't really going to be a productive option. Is there one thing that comes to mind that like everybody should be thinking about? Whether that's a jingle they should be singing in their head, a software they should be looking into, a mantra that they should have as we're entering into this, as you've both put it in different ways, this new world of work with AI being so closely tied to how we show up every day and do our jobs.
Well, I mean, this is top of mind for me, but I think customer focus starts with empathy, and the best way I think most software users can build empathy is to go through the new user onboarding experience. And
Mm.
sometimes it's actually even really hard to provision that. And, you know, I think it's a very, very humbling thing to do, and one that I'd recommend that people try. Go through your software like a first time user.
That's awesome. I love that. I'm glad you went first, Sadie, because I wanted to copy off your work, just the spirit of education. Just kidding. But Chris, even in one of your questions that we didn't get to, but like, a lot of times in these CX initiatives broadly, people are like,
Mhm.
hey, are we really ready for that? Do we need that, et cetera, right? And I'd be like, if you say you're not ready for this stuff, that means you're not ready for customer retention or customers to be getting
Mhm.
value. You're not ready for them to adopt your service. I mean, it's almost like ridiculous. But I think the reframe is like, it's what you said, Chris. It's not educating our customers, training them. It's not certifying them. It's up-leveling that. It's like, I want to make my customers feel like this is helping them feel better about their job, get promoted, make more money, spend time with their family, like the true deep human needs. And I think that's where you can fuse all this stuff together. Yeah, you have a community, you have certification, you have badges, you have training, you have whatever. It's like, no, we're making our customers successful as human beings. And if I closed out to tie to the opening icebreaker, I'd say no matter what stage you are, no matter what kind of company, I think you are ready for it in terms of training.